"You cost me too much peace, Loretta. You're an expensive mistake." Those were the last words Finian Lockwood spoke to his wife before tossing a settlement check across the mahogany desk. A check that barely covered rent, let alone a future. He thought he was buying his freedom. He thought he was cutting off a leech. He didn't know that as she walked out into the rain, shivering and silent, she was carrying 2 hearts' beatings inside her rib cage. 18 years of silence. 18 years of building an empire on a foundation of ice. Until today, when the phone rang and the woman he discarded returned with a bill he couldn't pay with money alone. This is the story of the debt that finally came due. Chapter 1. The Ledger of Severance. The sound of the pen scratching against the paper was louder than the thunder rattling the window panes of the Kensington townhouse. It was a Mont Blanc Meisterstück, heavy and black, an instrument of authority. To Finian Lockwood, 32 years old and already weary of emotional entanglements, the sound was the friction of liberation. "Sign here," Finian said. He didn't look up. He was studying the grain of the wood on his desk, tracing the chaotic swirl of the walnut with eyes that refused to acknowledge the woman standing 3 feet away. Loretta Hale did not pick up the pen immediately. She stood with her hands clasped over her stomach, hidden beneath the oversized folds of a grey wool cardigan that had seen better days. The air in the library was stifling, scented with old paper, beeswax, and the sharp metallic tang of Finian's impatience. She felt a wave of nausea roll through her, a physical lurch that had plagued her for 6 weeks, but she swallowed it down, tasting bile and fear. "Finian," she whispered, her voice cracked, dry and brittle. "Please, just look at me." Finian exhaled, a sharp hiss of air through his nose. He adjusted the cuffs of his bespoke shirt, the silk cool against his wrist. He finally raised his head. His eyes were the color of a winter sea, cold and churning with an irritation he felt entirely justified in feeling. "We have discussed this, Loretta," he said, his tone clipped, the vowels rounded and sharp. "The lawyers have discussed this. The prenup was clear. Infidelity is not the only breach of contract. Irreconcilable incompatibility covers the rest. You are suffocating me. You want a life I do not have the energy to curate for you." "I never asked for a curated life," Loretta said, stepping forward. The carpet muffled her footsteps, making her feel like a ghost haunting a house she was being exorcised from. "I asked for a husband. You're never here. And when you are, you look through me like I'm a smudge on your window." "And now," Finian said, tapping the document, "I am cleaning the glass." The cruelty of it took the breath from her lungs. It wasn't just that he was leaving her, it was the efficiency of it. He was treating their 3-year marriage like a failing subsidiary company that needed to be liquidated to stop the bleeding. "I'm not well, Finn," she tried, the nickname slipping out before she could catch it. She felt the secret pressing against the back of her teeth. "I'm pregnant. We are going to have a baby." It was the trump card. It was the anchor that could hold the ship. But as she looked at him, at the sneer curling the corner of his mouth, at the utter lack of warmth in his posture, a terrifying realization paralyzed her. If she told him now, he wouldn't see a child. He would see a trap. He would see another expense, another shackle. He would think she was lying to keep her claws in his fortune. Or worse, he would take the child and discard her anyway, burying her in legal fees until she lost custody. Finian Lockwood won every war he started. "You're always not well," Finian said, standing up. He was tall, imposing, looming over the desk like a judge. "Headaches, fatigue, nerves. You are high maintenance, Loretta. You are an expensive exhaustion. This check," He gestured to the slip of paper resting on top of the divorce decree. "Is generous. It is more than you brought into this marriage. Take it. Start over. Find someone who enjoys whatever this clinging dependency is." Loretta looked at the check. £25,000. To a normal person, a windfall. To Finian Lockwood, whose portfolio had just crossed the 10 million mark, it was pocket change. It was go-away money. The injustice burned hot behind her eyes. Expensive. He called her expensive because she wanted him home for dinner? Because she asked why he smelled of another woman's perfume last month. She reached for the pen. Her hand trembled, not from weakness, but from a sudden, ferocious rage. She wasn't shaking. She was vibrating with the force of a decision, solidifying in her gut. "He does not deserve to know," the voice in her head screamed. "He forfeited the right to this truth the moment he called you a mistake." She signed. Loretta Hale. She didn't use his last name. She reverted to her own, reclaiming the only thing she had left. "Done," she said, her voice suddenly steady, dropping an octave. The nausea subsided, replaced by a cold clarity. Finian blinked, surprised by the sudden shift in her demeanor. He snatched the papers up, checking the signature, ensuring his freedom was legally binding. "Good. Giselle will call you a taxi. You can have your things sent for." "I don't want them," Loretta said. She turned toward the heavy oak doors. "I don't want anything that was in this house." "Loretta," Finian called out as she reached the handle. He picked up the check she had left on the desk. "You forgot the money." She stopped. She looked back at him, her hand resting on her stomach, shielding the tiny spark of life he would never know. "Keep it," she said, her eyes dry, burning with a dignity that made Finian uncomfortable for the first time that day. "You'll need it. It costs a lot to be as empty as you are." She walked out. The heavy door clicked shut, sealing the silence. Finian stood alone in the library. The storm outside lashed against the glass. He looked at the check, then at the signed papers. He felt a momentary flicker of something. Unease? Regret? No. It was relief. He poured himself a scotch, amber liquid splashing into crystal. "Good riddance," he muttered, raising the glass to the empty room. He had no idea that he had just signed away the only thing that would ever truly matter. London. Present day. 18 years later. The skyline of London had changed, and Finian Lockwood had helped change it. From the 45th floor of the Lockwood & Associates Tower at Canary Wharf, the city looked like a circuit board of light and ambition. Finian stood by the floor-to-ceiling glass, staring down at the grey ribbon of the Thames. At 50, he was more striking than he had been at 32. The silver in his hair at the temples had been carefully maintained by the best barbers in Mayfair. His suit was a bespoke dark navy brioni, cut to hide the slight thickening of his waist, though he was still fit, fueled by a regimen of squash and solitude. He was worth £400 million now. He had acquired 3 tech firms, a shipping logistics company, and a reputation as a corporate surgeon. He cut out the rot, saved the body, and didn't care about the pain caused during the operation. "Your 3 o'clock is cancelled, Mr. Lockwood. The Japanese delegation is stuck in Heathrow due to the strikes." A voice cut through the silence. Finian didn't turn. He watched a barge struggle against the current of the river. "Reschedule them for Tuesday, and send a bottle of the 82 Petrus to their hotel with my apologies." "Already done," the voice replied. Giselle Brooks stood by the door, holding a tablet. She had been with him since the beginning, since the day Loretta left. Giselle was 55 now, sharp-featured, fiercely intelligent, and the only person on earth who wasn't afraid of Finian. She was his gatekeeper, his conscience, when he bothered to listen, and the architect of his schedule. "You have a gap," Giselle noted, tapping her screen. "You could go home early." Finian scoffed, finally turning away from the window. "Home? To do what, Giselle? Rearrange the art collection. The penthouse is quiet enough as it is." "You could date again," Giselle suggested, her tone neutral, though her eyes held a familiar pity he detested. "Lady Sterling has called 3 times. Lady Sterling wants a donor for her equestrian charity, not a husband," Finian said, moving to his massive glass desk. He sat down, the leather chair groaning softly. "I am married to this, Giselle. This works. This never asks me where I've been." "It also doesn't hold your hand when you're dying," Giselle murmured. "I plan to live forever out of spite," Finian retorted, opening his laptop. "Is that all?" Giselle hesitated. It was a rare hesitation. Usually, she was fluid motion and certainty. "What?" Finian snapped, looking up. "There was a call," Giselle said slowly, "on the private line, the one that bypasses the switchboard, the one only 5 people have the number for." Finian frowned. "Who?" She didn't give a name initially, but the caller ID, it was a landline, from a payphone in Hackney. "Hackney?" Finian raised an eyebrow. "I don't know anyone in Hackney." "She said," Giselle paused, looking at him with an intensity that made his skin prickle. "She said she was the expensive mistake." The room seemed to drop in temperature. The air conditioning hummed, but suddenly the silence was deafening. Finian's hand froze over his mouse. The expensive mistake. The phrase clawed its way out of the memory vault he had sealed 18 years ago. He saw the rain. He saw the grey cardigan. He saw the check left on the desk. "Loretta," he breathed. The name tasted like ash. He hadn't thought of her in years. Truly, there had been no Christmas cards, no alimony demands, no late-night drunk dials. She had simply vanished into the sprawling anonymity of London. He had assumed she moved back north, remarried a plumber, and got fat on mediocrity. "She left a number?" Finian asked, his voice tight. "She's on the line," Giselle said softly. "I put her on hold." Finian stared at the blinking red light on his console. It pulsed like a heartbeat. Why now? Was she broke? Dying? Did she finally want the £25,000 adjusted for inflation? A cynicism honed by decades of corporate warfare hardened his chest. She wanted money. They always wanted money. "Put her through," Finian said, leaning back, composing his face into a mask of bored indifference, even though no one could see him. Giselle nodded and pressed a button on the console, then stepped out of the room, closing the door softly. Finian picked up the receiver. He didn't speak first. It was a power move. Wait for the other party to break the silence. For 10 seconds, there was only the sound of static and distant traffic on the other end. Background noise. A siren wailing. "Hello, Finian," the voice came. It was older. The timbre was rougher, worn down by time and perhaps cigarettes or sorrow, but it was unmistakably her. "Loretta," he said coolly, "to what do I owe the pleasure? It's been a while." 18 years, 4 months and 12 days, she replied instantly. There was no warmth in her voice, only a desperate, jagged exhaustion. "I'm a busy man, Loretta. If this is about the settlement, I don't want your money for me." She cut him off. "I never took it then, and I don't want it now." "Then why call? Nostalgia?" "I'm calling because I have no choice," she said. Her voice trembled, and for a second, he heard the same young woman standing in his library. "I've sold the car. I've sold my mother's ring. I've taken double shifts at the diner. But it's not enough. The lawyers say we need a QC. Finian. A real one, not a public defender." Finian frowned. Lawyers. Are you in trouble? Not me, she said. She took a jagged breath. Lucien. Who is Lucien? The silence on the other end stretched, heavy and pregnant, with a truth that was about to shatter his world. Lucien, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper that roared in his ear, is your son. Finian let out a short, incredulous laugh. It was a defensive reflex, a shield springing up to deflect a blow he hadn't seen coming. My son, he repeated, the words tasting absurd. Loretta, please. If this is a shakedown, it's a clumsy one. 18 years. You wait 18 years to tell me I have a child? I waited because I wanted him to be decent. Loretta's voice hardened, stripped of the earlier tremor. I wanted him to know how to love people, not just own them. I raised him away from you to save him from becoming you. And yet, Finian countered, his grip on the phone tightening until his knuckles turned white. Here you are, asking for money. It seems your moral high ground has a price tag after all. He's in prison, Finian! She screamed. The sound distorted over the line, raw and terrified. The outburst shocked him into silence. Loretta never screamed. She cried, she retreated. But she never screamed. He didn't do it, she continued, rushing the words out now, sobbing. He was in the wrong place, a drug bust in a council estate in Hackney. They swept everyone up. He was just walking home from his tutoring job. But the police, they found a knife nearby. They're pinning it on him because he has a prior caution for graffiti. They're charging him with intent to supply and possession of a weapon. He's looking at 5 years. Finian. 5 years. He's 18. He's a boy. He's supposed to go to University of Manchester in the fall to study architecture. Finian's mind raced. Architecture. I wanted to be an architect, he thought involuntarily, before finance took over. Why should I believe you? Finian asked, though the ice in his chest was beginning to crack. Biologically, why should I believe he is mine? Because he has your eyes, Loretta said, her voice hollow. And he has your stubbornness, and because I am willing to take a DNA test right now. But we don't have time for the lab results to come back before the bail hearing tomorrow morning. If he stays in remand, he loses his scholarship. He loses everything. Finian swiveled his chair, looking out at the city again. The lights of London seemed sharper, harsher. A son, an 18-year-old boy named Lucian. What do you want? Finian asked quietly. I need £10,000 for the bail surety, she said, and I need a lawyer who isn't overworked and underpaid. I need you to use that power you love so much to save a boy who shares your blood, even if you don't know his name. And if I say no? Then you prove me right, Loretta said. You prove that you really are just a checkbook in a suit. And I will tell Lucien the truth. I told him his father was dead, a good man who died young. If you refuse, I will go to that visitation room and tell him his father is alive, rich, and decided he wasn't worth saving. The threat hung in the air. It wasn't blackmail. It was a promise of emotional devastation. Finian felt a strange sensation in his chest. It wasn't love. He didn't know this boy. It was a challenge to his ego. It was a stain on the name Lockwood. A Lockwood in a cage? A Lockwood needing a public defender? Where are you? Finian demanded. The payphone outside the Tesco on Mare Street. My mobile was cut off yesterday. Stay there, Finian said. I'm coming. You don't have to come, Loretta said quickly, sounding alarmed. Just, can you wire the money? I can give you the solicitor's details. No, Finian said, standing up. He felt a surge of adrenaline he hadn't felt since his last hostile takeover. If I'm going to pay for this product, I am going to inspect it. I am coming to see you, Loretta, and I am coming to see the boy." He hung up the phone before she could argue. He pressed the intercom button. "Giselle." She appeared instantly, as if she had been hovering. "Yes, sir." "Cancel the dinner with the MP," Finian said, grabbing his coat. "Call the driver. We are going to Hackney." "Hackney, sir?" Giselle's eyebrows shot up. "Yes. And get me St. John Rivers on the phone. I need the best criminal defense barrister in London, and I need him available tomorrow morning." "Is everything all right, Finian?" Giselle asked, dropping the formal title. Finian stopped at the door. He looked at her, his face pale, but his eyes burning with a strange, terrifying light. "I don't know, Giselle. I think I just acquired a liability." "A liability?" "A son," Finian said. "Apparently, I have a son." He walked out, leaving Giselle stunned in the silent, expensive office. The elevator ride down took 40 seconds. In those 40 seconds, Finian Lockwood tried to calculate the ROI of fatherhood, but for the first time in his life, the math wouldn't work. The variables were too chaotic. He stepped into the waiting Bentley. The leather smelled rich and familiar. "Mare Street, Hackney," he told the driver. "And drive fast." As the car slipped into the London traffic, moving from the gleaming steel of Canary Wharf toward the grittier, graffiti-stained streets of East London, Finian watched the rain streak the window. "He has your eyes." Finian looked at his reflection in the dark glass. He wondered what those eyes would look like, looking back at him from behind bars. Hackney. East London. The Bentley Continental GT looked like a spaceship that had crash-landed on Mare Street. Its polished obsidian panels reflected the neon flicker of a chicken shop sign and the dull grey of the wet pavement. Passers-by stared, some with envy, others with open hostility. Finian Lockwood stepped out. The air here tasted different than in Canary Wharf. It was thicker, laced with exhaust fumes, frying oil, and the damp, earthy scent of urban decay. He tightened his cashmere coat against the drizzle, feeling conspicuously out of place. He saw her immediately. Loretta was standing under the overhang of the supermarket, arms wrapped tightly around herself. She was wearing a beige raincoat that was 2 sizes too big, likely bought second-hand. Her hair, once a vibrant auburn that caught the sun, was now a duller shade, pulled back into a severe, practical bun, streaked with grey. 18 years. It was a lifetime. Finian walked toward her. He didn't rush. He moved with the measured cadence of a man who controlled his environment, even when he was terrified of what he might find. As he got closer, the details sharpened, the fine lines around her eyes, the roughness of her hands clutching a worn leather purse. She looked tired, bone-deep tired, in a way that sleep couldn't fix. "Finian," she said, as he stopped 3 feet away. She didn't smile. She didn't reach out. She looked at him with a mixture of relief and defensive anger. "Loretta," he nodded, his voice low. "You look old?" She cut in, a wry, bitter smile touching her lips. "Poor. Tired. Don't strain yourself looking for a compliment, Finn. It's not a boardroom." "I was going to say you look the same," he lied smoothly, though there was a ghost of the woman he married in the set of her jaw. "Get in the car. We can't talk here." "I'm not getting in that thing," she said, glancing at the Bentley. "People like me don't get into cars like that without handcuffs involved." "Don't be difficult," Finian snapped, his patience fraying instantly. "It's raining. I'm not conducting a family reunion next to a bin overflowing with lottery tickets. Get in." She hesitated, then sighed, the fight draining out of her shoulders. She walked to the car. The driver, a stoic man named Evans, opened the door for her. She slid onto the cream leather, looking afraid to touch anything. Inside, The silence was hermetically sealed against the street noise. Finian sat beside her, leaving a deliberate foot of space between them. "Tell me about the arrest," Finian commanded, pulling a notepad from his breast pocket. "He was coming back from the community center," Loretta said, staring at her hands. "He tutors math for the younger kids. He's a good boy, Finn. He doesn't drink. He doesn't run with gangs. He draws. He just draws buildings all day." "Architecture," Finian muttered. "You said." "He wants to build things that last," she said pointedly, "unlike his father." Finian ignored the jab. "The police report?" "They said he fit the description. Hoodie, jeans, height. They found him running. He was running because it started raining, Finn. But they pinned him down, found a knife in the gutter 3 yards away, and decided it was his. They didn't test for prints. They just saw a boy from the estate and closed the case." Finian tapped his pen against the pad. "And the prior caution?" "He was 15, Loretta said defensively. "He painted a mural on a derelict wall. It wasn't tagging, it was art. But the council didn't see it that way." "A criminal record is a criminal record, Loretta. The magistrate won't care about artistic intent." Finian closed the notebook. He turned to look at her fully. "Why didn't you tell me? When he was born?" "Why?" Loretta turned to him, her eyes blazing. "Because you called us a mistake. You called me an expense. I wasn't going to let my son grow up feeling like he was a line item in a ledger you resented paying. We struggled, yes. We ate beans on toast more nights than I can count. But he was loved. He was never looked at the way you're looking at me right now, like a problem to be solved." Finian felt a twitch in his jaw. "I am a problem solver, Loretta. That is why you called me, so let me solve it." He tapped the partition glass. "Evans, Stoke Newington Police Station." "You're going to see him?" Loretta asked, panic flaring in her eyes. "Finn, he doesn't know. He thinks his father was a mechanic named Thomas who died in a car crash." Finian froze. "A mechanic?" "It seemed kinder," she whispered. "Kinder to kill me off than to admit I exist?" Finian laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "You have painted quite the picture, Loretta." "Well, don't worry. I won't shatter your mythology tonight. I'm just his lawyer's financier. For now." The car pulled away, gliding over the potholes. Finian looked out the window, watching the city blur. He felt a strange weight in his stomach, a heaviness that had nothing to do with dinner. He was about to meet a ghost he had unknowingly created, and who believed he was already dead. The holding area of the police station smelled of industrial cleaner, stale sweat, and hopelessness. It was a sensory assault that made Finian want to hold his breath. He walked beside St. John Rivers, the barrister Giselle had summoned. Rivers was a shark in a silk suit, a man who cost £800 an hour and was worth every penny. "Leave the talking to me, Mr. Lockwood," Rivers said smoothly as they navigated the corridors. "We are just establishing representation and ensuring his welfare." "I want to see him," Finian said. "I want to speak to him." "Briefly," Rivers advised. "He's likely frightened and volatile." The custody sergeant, a tired-looking woman with coffee stains on her uniform, unlocked the heavy steel door to interview room 3. "You've got 10 minutes, she grunted. Finian stepped inside. The room was a concrete box with a bolted-down table and 2 chairs. A 2-way mirror dominated one wall. And there he was. Lucien Hale sat slumped in the chair, his head in his hands. He was wearing a grey hoodie, jeans and scuffed trainers. At the sound of the door, he looked up. Finian felt the air leave his lungs as if he'd been punched. It wasn't just the eyes, though they were the same icy blue as his own. It was the structure of the face, the high cheekbones, the sharp jawline. the way his brow furrowed when he was assessing a threat. It was looking into a mirror that reflected 30 years into the past. Lucian stood up slowly. He was tall, lanky, but broad-shouldered, with a restless energy vibrating under his skin. He looked from Rivers to Finian, his gaze lingering on Finian's suit, his watch, his shoes. He was analyzing the wealth in the room with a cynicism that broke Finian's heart. "Who are you?" Lucien asked. His voice was deep, cracking slightly with fatigue. "You're not duty solicitors." "No," Rivers said, stepping forward and placing a briefcase on the table. "I am St. John Rivers. Your mother has retained me to represent you." Lucien scoffed, a dry, sharp sound. "My mum makes £12 an hour. She can't afford your tie, let alone your representation." "A benefactor has stepped in," Rivers said smoothly. He gestured to Finian. "This is Mr. Lockwood, an old friend of the family." "Friend?" Lucien narrowed his eyes at Finian. "Mum doesn't have friends who wear £5,000 suits. Who are you, really?" Finian stepped closer. Up close, he could see the bruising of exhaustion under the boy's eyes. He could see the ink stains on his fingers, charcoal and graphite. "I knew your mother a long time ago," Finian said, his voice steady, though his pulse was hammering in his throat. "She called me. She told me you didn't do this." "I didn't," Lucien said fiercely, leaning forward. "I was walking. That's it. Just walking. But they don't care. To them, I'm just another estate kid. Hood up, head down, must be guilty." "I believe you," Finian said, and surprisingly, he did. There was a raw honesty in the boy's anger. It wasn't the evasive, shifty-eyed look of the guilty. It was the righteous indignation of the innocent. "Why do you care?" Lucien challenged. "What do you want?" "I want to know why you had a knife," Finian asked, ignoring the question. "I didn't have a knife," Lucien shouted, slamming his hand on the table. "It was in the gutter. It was rusted. It wasn't mine. I carry pencils, not blades. Look at my hands." He shoved his hands out. "Graphite, not blood." Finian looked at the long, artistic fingers. He reached out, almost instinctively, to touch the boy's shoulder, but stopped himself. "Architecture," Finian said softly. "You want to be an architect?" Lucien blinked, thrown off balance. "Yeah, so, what do you like? Brutalism? Neoclassical?" Lucien hesitated, confused by the shift. "Sustainable modernism? Incorporating green space into high-density housing? People shouldn't have to live in concrete boxes like this." He gestured around the cell. Finian smiled. It was a small, genuine smile. "No, they shouldn't. Structures affect the soul, don't they?" Lucien looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time. "Yeah, they do." "Mr. Lockwood," Rivers interrupted. "We need to go over the statement." Finian nodded. He backed away toward the door. "We're going to get you out, Lucien," Finian said. "Tomorrow. You have my word." "Why?" Lucien asked again, his voice quieter now, vulnerable. "Why are you doing this?" Finian paused with his hand on the door handle. He looked back at the boy, his flesh and blood, sitting in a cage because the world had decided he didn't matter. "Because," Finian said, his voice thick with a sudden, overwhelming emotion, "injustice is an expensive mistake, and I'm tired of mistakes." He walked out before he could say anything else, leaving Lucien staring after him, a frown creasing his forehead, a frown that matched Finian's exactly. Highbury Corner Magistrates' Court. The courtroom was a theatre of misery. It smelled of damp wool and anxiety. The fluorescent lights buzzed with a headache-inducing frequency. Finian sat in the back row of the public gallery, next to Loretta. She was shaking. He could feel the tremors radiating off her through the wooden bench. "Breathe," he whispered, not looking at her. They usually deny bail for knife crimes, she whispered back, clutching a rosary, especially with a prior. Usually, Finian said, adjusting his cuffs, but usually the defendant doesn't have St. John Rivers. The clerk called the case. R versus Lucian Hale. Lucian was led into the dock. He looked smaller behind the glass partition. He scanned the room, finding his mother instantly. He offered her a brave, tight smile. Then his eyes found Finian. The confusion returned to his face. The Crown prosecutor, a harried young woman with a stack of files teetering on her desk, stood up. "Your Worship," she began, "the Crown opposes bail. The defendant was found in the vicinity of a violent altercation involving Class A drugs. A weapon was recovered mere meters from his person. He has a history of antisocial behavior. We believe there is a significant risk of reoffending and flight." Loretta let out a small whimper. Finian placed his hand over hers. His hand was warm, heavy, and solid. She didn't pull away. St. John Rivers stood up. He didn't rush. He buttoned his jacket. He adjusted his spectacles. The room seemed to quiet down, waiting for him. "Your Worship," Rivers began, his voice a rich baritone that commanded attention. "The Crown's case is not merely circumstantial. It is speculative fiction. No fingerprints link my client to the weapon. No drugs were found on his person. The history of antisocial behavior refers to a mural painted 3 years ago, an act of artistic expression, not violence." Rivers paused, letting the words hang. "Furthermore," he continued, "the Crown suggests a risk of flight. My client is a scholarship student accepted to the University of Manchester. He is a tutor to underprivileged children. He is the primary carer for his mother." Rivers turned, gesturing toward the gallery. "And regarding the surety, Mr. Finian Lockwood, CEO of Lockwood and Associates, is present in the court today. He is prepared to stand surety in the amount of £50,000 to guarantee Mr. Hale's appearance." A ripple of murmurs went through the courtroom. The magistrates, 2 women and a man, looked up, surprised. £50,000 was an unheard-of sum for a minor possession charge in this court. The head magistrate peered over her glasses at Finian. Finian stood up, nodding once, sharply. The authority he radiated was palpable. It said, "I am not a man who backs losers." £50,000, the magistrate repeated, "and he is willing to house the defendant at his residence in Kensington should the court require a change of address to remove him from the problematic environment of the estate," Rivers added. This was news to Loretta. She gasped, turning to Finian. "What?" "Hush," Finian hissed. The magistrates conferred. It took less than 2 minutes. "Bail is granted," the head magistrate announced. "Conditions: curfew 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. Surety of £50,000. Defendant is to reside at the address provided by Mr. Lockwood." The gavel banged. Loretta sagged against the bench, sobbing with relief. "He's out! He's out!" Finian didn't smile. He was already calculating the next move. He had bought the boy's freedom, but he had also just legally bound his son to him. 20 minutes later, they stood on the steps of the courthouse. The rain had stopped, leaving the pavement slick and shining. Lucian walked out, looking dazed, holding a plastic bag with his shoelaces and belt. Loretta ran to him, hugging him fiercely. "Oh, thank God! Thank God!" Lucian hugged her back, burying his face in her shoulder. For a moment, they were a closed circuit of love and relief that Finian couldn't enter. He felt a sharp pang of jealousy, a cold, lonely ache in his chest. Lucian pulled away and looked at Finian. "You put up 50 grand? And I have to live with you?" "It was the only way to guarantee bail," Finian said, his voice businesslike to mask his nerves. "The estate is considered a risk factor. My home is not." "I don't even know you," Lucien said, his eyes narrowing. "Why would you do this for a friend of the family? Mum, who is he?" Loretta looked at Finian. Her eyes pleaded with him. "Not now. Not yet." Finian looked at the boy. He wanted to say it. "I am your father." But looking at the distrust in Lucien's eyes, he knew that truth would destroy the fragile victory they had just won. "I am a man who invests in potential," Finian said cryptically. "And your mother is right. You have talent. I don't like to see talent wasted in a cell." He gestured to the Bentley idling at the curb. "Get in," Finian said. "We have a lot to discuss. And I imagine you're hungry." Lucien looked at his mother. Loretta nodded, wiping her eyes. "It's okay, Luce. Go with him. I'll go pack your bag." "You're coming too," Finian said to Loretta. "What?" she asked. "I'm not separating you," Finian said, his voice softening. "There are 5 bedrooms. You're not staying in Hackney alone while this investigation is ongoing. Get in the car, Loretta." She looked at him, searching for the trap. But all she saw was a man trying, clumsily and arrogantly, to do the right thing for the first time in 2 decades. She took her son's hand and led him toward the car. Finian watched them. He had his son. He had his ex-wife. He had a legal battle ahead, and for the first time in 18 years, the silence in his head was gone, replaced by the terrifying, chaotic noise of a family. Kensington. London. The Bentley pulled into the gravel driveway of the Kensington townhouse. It was a white stucco fortress, 4 stories of Victorian grandeur, modernized with unyielding precision. Security cameras blinked red in the shadows of the manicured hedges. Lucien stepped out, his bag of belongings, a rucksack that looked like it had survived a war, slung over one shoulder. He looked up at the house, craning his neck. "It's Georgian, isn't it?" Lucien asked, his voice quiet. "But the portico has been restored with... Is that Portland stone?" Finian looked at the boy, surprised. "Yes. Most people just see a big house. You see the materials." "Materials matter," Lucien murmured. "They tell you if a building is going to last or crumble." Inside, the house was a museum of cold comfort. The foyer was a vast expanse of black and white marble. A Chihuly glass chandelier hung like a frozen explosion of amber and red tentacles above them. The air was scented with expensive candles, sandalwood and something sterile like ozone. Giselle was waiting for them. She had arranged a late supper, her face a mask of professional neutrality, though her eyes widened imperceptibly when she saw Lucien. "Welcome," she said. "I've prepared the guest wing. 2 suites." "We don't need suites," Loretta said, clutching her purse. "A room is fine. Just a room." "You will take the suites," Finian said, handing his coat to a silent staff member. "This house has 8 bedrooms, Loretta. I don't need you sleeping in a broom cupboard to prove a point about your humility." Dinner was an exercise in excruciating tension. They sat at a table long enough to land a plane on. Finian sat at the head, Loretta and Lucien on the right. The silence was broken only by the clink of silver against bone china. Lucien ate quickly, with the hunger of a growing boy who was used to smaller portions. But he remembered his manners. He waited for Loretta to start. He didn't speak with his mouth full. "So," Finian said, slicing his steak with surgical precision, "University of Manchester. Architecture." "If I get to go," Lucien said darkly, pushing a pea around his plate. "Hard to study loads when you're in prison." "You are not going to prison," Finian stated. "Rivers will dismantle their case." "Rivers costs a fortune," Lucien said, looking directly at Finian. "Why are you doing this? Mum said you were an old friend, but I've never heard your name. Not once. and we talk about everything." Loretta froze, her fork halfway to her mouth. Finian took a sip of wine, a rich Bordeaux that tasted like iron. "I knew your father." The lie tasted sour, but he delivered it smoothly. Lucien perked up. "Thomas? You knew Thomas?" "Briefly," Finian said. "We worked together a long time ago. He was a good man with bad luck." "He died in a crash," Lucien said, reciting the mythology Loretta had built. "Before I was born." "Yes," Finian said, his eyes locking with Loretta's terrified gaze. "He missed out on a great deal." "So you're doing this out of... what?" "Guilt?" Lucien pressed. He was sharp. Too sharp. "Duty," Finian corrected. "When a man accumulates the resources I have, he has a duty to correct imbalances in the ledger. Consider this a scholarship, an investment." Lucien looked around the room, at the abstract art, the heavy drapes, the lonely expanse of the table. "It's a nice house," Lucien said, "but it's cold. The ceilings are too high for the room dimensions. The acoustics are bad. You can hear the echo of your own fork. It wasn't built for people to live in. It was built for people to be impressed by." Finian put his knife down. No one had criticized his house in 10 years. Everyone else fawned over the Architecture Digest features. "And how would you fix it?" Finian challenged. "Lower the lighting," Lucien said instantly. "Add textiles to the walls to dampen the sound. Break up the open plan with partitions. Make spaces where you can't be seen from the doorway. A home should have secrets. This place, it exposes you." Finian stared at him. The boy had diagnosed the house's spiritual flaw in 5 minutes. It was a house for a man with nothing to hide and no one to hold. "Interesting," Finian murmured. "Perhaps you can draft some sketches, since you have a curfew and nowhere to go." "Maybe," Lucien shrugged, retreating back into his hoodie. Loretta watched them, her heart hammering. They were already speaking a language she didn't understand, the language of angles and light and structure. She saw the dangerous spark of connection, and for the first time, she feared Finian's influence more than his rejection. The next 3 days were a strange purgatory. Lucien was confined to the house by the court order. He spent his time pacing the garden or sitting in the library, sketching furiously in a battered notebook. Finian found himself coming home earlier. He told Giselle it was to monitor the legal situation, but the truth was, he wanted to watch the boy. On Thursday evening, Finian walked into the library. Lucien was sprawled on the Persian rug, surrounded by sheets of paper. He was drawing with a charcoal stick, his hand moving in sweeping, confident arcs. "What is it?" Finian asked, standing over him. Lucien didn't jump. "It's a concept for the estate. If they knocked down the tower blocks and built low-rise, high-density terracing with communal courtyards, you'd reduce crime by creating defensible space. People protect what they feel belongs to them. No one feels they belong to a concrete tower." Finian crouched down. The drawing was rough but brilliant. It showed an understanding of human behavior, not just bricks. Newman's defensible space theory, Finian noted, ambitious for an undergraduate. "I read a lot," Lucien said. "Libraries are free." Finian looked at the boy's hands, stained black with charcoal. He remembered his own hands at that age, stained with ink, before he started worrying about manicures and handshakes. "You have a good eye," Finian said. It was the first genuine compliment he had given in years. "But your load-bearing walls here," he pointed to a section, "are insufficient. The roof span is too wide. It would collapse." "No, it wouldn't," Lucien argued. "Not if I used cross-laminated timber." "Timber warps. Steel is predictable." "Steel is cold," Lucien shot back. "Timber breathes." They argued for an hour. They argued about tensile strength, about light, about the ethics of gentrification. For an hour, Finian wasn't the billionaire CEO, and Lucian wasn't the criminal defendant. They were just two minds grinding against each other, creating sparks. Loretta stood in the doorway, unnoticed. She watched Finian sketching on Lucian's paper, correcting a line, and Lucian nodding, absorbing the knowledge like a sponge. She saw the similarities in their posture, the way they both leaned in, the way they furrowed their brows. She felt a sudden, sharp grief. She had kept them apart to protect Lucian, but looking at them now, she wondered if she had also robbed him of something vital. "Finian," she said, stepping into the room. The spell broke. Finian stood up, dusting off his knees. Lucien scrambled to gather his papers. "I need to speak to you," Loretta said to Finian. "Alone?" Finian nodded. "Lucien, go wash up for dinner." When the boy was gone, Loretta turned on Finian. "Stop it." "Stop what?" "Stop playing father. Stop trying to impress him with your knowledge and your library. You don't get to be the mentor now, Finn. You don't get to swoop in and be the hero because it's fun for you." "Fun?" Finian's voice rose. "Do you think this is fun? I have a board meeting tomorrow regarding a merger worth £2 billion, and instead I am debating roof trusses with a teenager who thinks I'm a stranger. Then why are you doing it?" "Because he's talented," Finian shouted. "He has a gift, Loretta, a gift I recognize, and I won't let him rot in a cell or waste away drawing on napkins because of a system that is rigged against him." "He doesn't need your ambition," Loretta hissed. "He needs his mother. He needs safety. He needs to know that love isn't conditional on performance." "And what have you given him?" Finian shot back, cruel instincts flaring. "Poverty, struggle, a fake dead father." "I gave him a home," Loretta said, tears welling in her eyes. "A home that wasn't empty, even if the fridge was. Don't you dare judge me, Finian Lockwood. You signed the check. You bought your peace. Don't complain now about the interest rates." Finian turned away, staring at the fire. The flames danced, consuming the oxygen in the room. "I'm not judging you," he said quietly. "I'm judging myself, and I don't like the verdict." Friday morning brought rain and a decision that would shatter the fragile peace of the house. St. John Rivers arrived early, laying a plea deal on the breakfast table. "Suspended sentence," Rivers explained. "No prison time, but a guilty plea." "Take it," Loretta urged, terrified. Lucian looked at Finian. "You said the innocent shouldn't bow to the convenient." "I did," Finian said, staring at the document. He saw the trap. A criminal record would bar Lucian from scholarships, from visas, from his future. "If you signed that, you are safe, but you are limited. If you fight, you risk prison, but you fight for your name." "I didn't do it," Lucien said, pushing the paper away. "I won't say I did." Finian nodded, a fierce pride burning in his chest. "Then we fight. Giselle, get the car. We're going to find the truth." The next 48 hours were a blur of high-stakes intervention. Finian didn't just hire investigators, he mobilized a private army. He spent £50,000 in bribes and bounties in Hackney alone. By Monday morning, they had it. A burner phone located by his security team, containing texts from a dealer named Ghost, bragging about dumping the knife. The trial was short. Rivers presented the new evidence with theatrical precision. The jury deliberated for less than an hour. "Not guilty." The words rang out like a bell. Loretta collapsed in relief. Lucian closed his eyes, letting out a breath he seemed to have been holding for weeks. But the real trial happened an hour later, in the back of the Bentley, as it idled outside the courthouse. "You saved me," Lucian said, looking at Finian with a mix of awe and confusion. You really did it. You went to the estate yourself. Caleb told me. I had to make sure, Finian said, looking out the window. Investments require oversight. Stop it, Loretta said sharply. She wiped her tears. Stop lying to him, Finian. Lucian looked between them. Lying about what? Finian froze. He looked at his ex-wife. He saw the resolve in her eyes. She was right. The check had cleared. The debt was paid. But the truth was still owed. I didn't know your father, Thomas, Finian said softly, turning to the boy. What? There was no Thomas, Finian continued, his voice cracking. There was only a man who was too young, too selfish, and too obsessed with his own reflection to see the value of what he held. A man who called his wife an expensive mistake and let her walk out into the rain. Lucien went still. He stared at Finian, the pieces falling into place, the eyes, the chin, the instant connection over sketches and steel. You? Lucien whispered. It's you? I am your father, Lucien, Finian said. I didn't know you existed until Loretta called, but that is no excuse. I should have looked back. I never looked back. Lucien pulled away, pressing against the door. The admiration in his eyes curdled into betrayal. You let us starve? You lived in a palace while Mum worked double shifts? You let me believe my dad was a hero. I am no hero, Finian said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out the old settlement check Loretta had returned. He ripped it in half. I am a man with a lot of money and a very empty life. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I am asking you to let me fix the roof. Let me pay for university. Let me help you build those houses. Not as a father. I haven't earned that title, but as a partner. Lucian looked at the torn check. He looked at his mother, who nodded slowly. Then he looked at the man who had saved his life. The man who shared his face. I'm not staying in Kensington, Lucien said, his voice shaky but firm. I'm going home to Hackney. I know, Finian said. But, Lucien added, pausing as he opened the door, the library. The acoustics are terrible. If I send you a draft for the renovation, will you look at it? Finian smiled. It was a genuine, broken, hopeful smile. I would look forward to it. Every day. Lucien stepped out. He walked away with his mother, back to their life. But he didn't look back with anger. He looked back with a question. Finian watched them go. The rain had stopped. For the first time in 18 years, the forecast was clear. YouTube conclusion. We spend our lives building fortresses to keep the world out, thinking safety lies in solitude. But Finian Lockwood learned that the strongest structures aren't made of steel or stone. They are made of truth, forgiveness, and the courage to admit when we are wrong. He didn't buy his son's love. He earned the right to be in the room. And sometimes, just being in the room is the greatest victory of all. If this story moved you, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more tales of redemption and human connection. Share this with someone who needs to know it's never too late to fix a mistake. Thanks for watching.